Okay. Well, let's start. I think we've still got maybe one or two people coming in, but yeah, if we start now. So, well, firstly, thanks for joining us on our webinar today. This is the third in our series of webinars. Our topic today is about invoicing and some tips around how to get paid quicker. And I'm pleased to be joined by Paul Late, CEO and founder of Next Level Business, the Growth Accountants. So over the next 20 minutes or so, Paul and I are going to highlight, or Paul's going to highlight some tips around kind of processes, how to ensure you get your invoices paid quicker. Obviously some tips around processes, some relate to systems. Although obviously you can use various systems. We'll be talking about Okappy in particular. And I'll take the second part of the webinar talking about how you can raise your invoices on Okappy, how you can manage, monitor your invoices and even get paid through Okappy. Just a bit of housekeeping, obviously to ensure this webinar runs smoothly. I think you're all on mute, but yeah, if you could ensure you kind of stay on mute. I say each time, I think like a lot of people, I'm still working from home. So if my broadband does cut out, bear with me, I'll try and reconnect or leave you in Paul's capable hands. If you do want the slides at the end of the webinar, let us know. Either send us a chat directly, send it to myself or AD, and we'll get those out to you. Likewise, if you want a recording of the webinar, we'll send that out after as well. If you want to ask questions throughout the webinar, again, please put them in the chat. You can either send them to everyone or send them direct to AD and he'll manage those. Just a heads up for our webinar next month. As I said, we've already done 3. First was about the VAT reverse charge. Last one was about 3 things you might not know about Okappy. Our next webinar on the 23rd of June is going to be talking about how you can use the network to grow your business. So follow us on Eventbrite if you're not doing already. Look out on our website. But yeah, sign up for that. Hopefully it be of interest. Again, half hour on the 23rd of June. Cool. I think we've got, just looking at the attendees, we've got a mixture. We've got some customers, some prospects, so some new people. So welcome to the community. First, I'll just have a quick kick off who Okappy is. It's a business-to-business connected workforce management platform, which applies social and market networking technology to a real business need, the need to communicate and collaborate with your employees, who are often at different locations, with your subcontractors, and with your customers. So we're helping the most forward-looking and dynamic companies increase transparency, reduce duplication, costs and errors, and really streamline processes, and ultimately making a significant contribution to a customer's bottom line profits. So by connecting to your customers and subcontractors on Okappy, you can send and receive jobs, see the status of those jobs as they're updated by your engineers or subcontractors in real time, and then you can raise your invoice at the touch of a button. And I guess it's that last point that we're really talking about today. But why are we talking about late payments? Well, late payments is an issue in the UK, particularly in some of the sectors that our customers work in, thinking of construction, facilities management, housing. Research by BAC, the payment organisation, suggests that about £32.5 billion is owed in the UK, which a lot of that's owed to small to medium-sized enterprises. And that equates to about 35,000 for the average small business. Obviously, late payments can be due to a number of factors. Obviously, what gets the most headlines is large companies delaying payments to improve their own cash flow. But a lot is also down to your own processes. One of the big change we hear when speaking to companies that come on board Okappy is the speed with which they can start raising their invoices, moving from a paper system to electronic system, can dramatically speed up the time which you get your invoices out. And by getting the invoices out quicker, ultimately that means you get paid quicker. Now, systems is obviously a large part of that, but processes are also key. And I think that's kind of really what Paul's going to touch on around the kind of the non-system type tips. So I think what we want you to take away is that late payments can be a headache, but there is a lot that you can do to make the whole process a lot smoother, more efficient, and ultimately quicker. So on that note, I'm going to introduce you to Paul. Paul's the CEO and founder of Next Level Business, the growth accountants. He has founded, grown, and exited several high-profile corporate startups in the telecoms and technology sectors. He's worked at board level in 4 different listed businesses and has been a non-executive director and chairman of a number of smaller customers. So I think a lot of relevant experience on both sides of the coin, big company and the smaller size. Like me, Paul's a keen motorsports enthusiast. He likes his rugby. And in the bio, he talks about reminiscing about past sporting glories in the swimming pool. So maybe that's a question you can ask at the end of the webinar. So Paul, over to you.
Thanks very much, Richard. Less said about the past sporting glories, the better. But hello, everybody, and good afternoon. I'm just going to run down a few tips based on my experience of both being on the big business side and dealing with small business clients, and also now providing finance teams and a platform for finance for small businesses, and how we have seen success in terms of sort of getting paid and invoicing with some of the businesses we're involved in. So I think Richard's right, late payments has been a bit of an issue for small businesses in the UK, and from our experience, about 50% of all of those late payments, so Richard said it's about 32 billion in the UK, about half of that in our experience is actually process related. So that's where your process and perhaps your customer's process isn't quite lined up for whatever reason, or they've got poor process, or you have, or something missing, and the connection's just not quite made until it's all a bit late. So in our experience, about half of that is sort of not due to deliberate late payment, but due to sort of misalignment of kind of process between supplier and customer. So the kind of the first tip I've really got is when you're dealing with other businesses, and particularly big businesses, is really try to onboard them into your organization and understand how to set them up in your world. So understand that a big business may have a different relationship manager to who you're going to be chasing for payment, or how you're going to be processing that payment. So making sure you've got things like the right number of contacts. There might be several for a big business, for example, in the accounts payable department versus, say, the person you're actually dealing with, could be very different. Make sure you understand what they require in terms of information to make a speedy payment. So it'll often be things like quoting PO numbers accurately. It will be making sure that the right contact or project's being quoted, those sorts of things. How they want the invoice to arrive. So are you sending it via email? Is it to a particular person? Is it into a portal? Do you need to do anything else? So often when dealing with small businesses, the answer is very simple. You sort of send an invoice directly to the person you've been dealing with. That's quite straightforward. Where it falls down is when that isn't the case, particularly with dealing with big businesses, and you need to understand that process and get set up properly. In our experience, once that has been done, it becomes much easier and much more likely that you're going to receive payment on time. So get set up. The next kind of top tip is just to make sure that you are sending those invoices sooner rather than later. Now that sounds blindingly obvious to say, but the amount of smaller businesses that we come across where there's perhaps 10 days, 2 weeks, even a month's delay between the work actually being completed and an invoice being raised and sent, obviously that's just eating into time, and getting those invoices, made up, reviewed, if necessary, approved and sent as soon as possible can take weeks out of the payment cycle. And in our experience, that works best where invoicing is a team sport. So where you've got members of your team who may be drafting or reviewing invoices, getting them out faster and making it a bit of a team sport is usually a good rule to unblocking any kind of workflows or people blockages that you get with raising invoices. So that's the sort of second tip. The third tip is really to make it easy to get paid. Again, this is all about pointing out the obvious to some extent, but making easy to get paid. What does that really mean? That means making sure that you quote everything on your invoice that you need to get paid. Some businesses will require SWIFT or BIC codes. Some will want the IBAN numbers on there. It's not just sort code and account number these days. You might be getting paid from an international source potentially in there. Your account name on your business bank account may not match your company name or your brand name, in which case when bigger businesses are doing checks, automated checks around sort code, account number and the bank account name, they may not match what they're expecting, and therefore they'll reject those payments. So just put all of the information that makes it really easy to get paid on there. And if you're dealing in multiple currencies or you've got multiple currency accounts, obviously put more than one payment option on there for dollars or euros or whatever else you might be getting paid in. The other emerging trend is to make it easy to pay by either direct debit or by card payment as well. So giving more options to get paid is often a good idea. And putting those on invoices now is really quite straightforward, as Richard will go into in his section. So make it easy to get paid. A few top tips on that. The next top tip is, assuming you've done all of that correctly, best practice in kind of credit control would be to check in early. So generally speaking, we would be advocating you check in with the customer around 7 days before the due date of payment, just to say a friendly hello, the invoice is due to be paid next week. Is everything okay and on track for payment? Now, the reason for doing that is to head off any issues that might have occurred in the previous steps before the due date has passed. So being a little bit proactive on that about a week in advance. Usually, if they're missing a piece of information or you haven't quoted a PO or something like that, that usually gives time to resolve those sorts of issues. So that's a good process, top tip to check in ahead of the due date. And if you've done all of that, it's absolutely within your right to go then and chase for payment once the due date has passed. So, the day after the due date has passed, if you haven't received payment, then it's absolutely, absolutely fine to start to say, hey, my invoice hasn't been paid on the due date. Can you give me an update? And generally speaking, the longer after the due date that you go, the more sort of severe the language is typically used in terms of chasing those things up. So a few days or a week, you're asking for an update. But if it's several weeks overdue or a month overdue, you're sort of getting into more increasing urgency with regards to the language you might be using to sort of chase that up. So getting on those things early. If it's not been paid, often what's the case that we found is that due dates are missed because bigger businesses will do weekly or bi-monthly payment cycles. So they might be on a 2-week bill payment cycle and your invoice happens to fall in between the 2 weeks, in which case they allocate the following week, for example, for bill payment. That should have been drawn out in kind of the setup process, but if it isn't, you're now aware of that and you're expecting to be paid maybe next week on a Friday as a response to that, which you can kind of note down the due date for that payment and then chase after that. So bigger businesses will have payment cycles that may not be in line with your invoicing dates. So just kind of be aware of that, but certainly chase as soon as the invoice isn't due. And the last point is really to say thank you for payment. So best practice in kind of credit control, especially when you're dealing with other businesses where there's credit controllers and accounts payable people, is once the invoice has been paid, to say thanks for paying the invoice. It both acknowledges the payment and reinforces the good behavior, if you like, that you're looking for. So you're wanting to, by doing this process, train your customer on 2 points. Train them that A, you're tracking this and that you will raise it with them if you haven't been paid on time, and B, that you appreciate being paid on time, and that you're giving them a bit of thanks for doing that. Speaking from a big company CFO perspective, if I was managing our cash and needed to not pay someone, the list of people we wouldn't pay would be the people that we don't hear from. So the ones that don't contact us when we don't pay an invoice. The ones that we do pay would be the ones that we know they are going to kick off, quote unquote, or be very vocal if we don't pay the invoices, and it's not worth our time engaging with that. So, you know, if a big business is or another business is under pressure, typically the people that don't say anything are the ones that get sidelined and unpaid. So make sure you're not in that camp. And that you're in the former camp, which is you've got a process, ultimately, like anything in a business, a process to deal with invoicing and to deal with getting paid on time. And if you follow some of those tips there, you know, we've seen that reduce debtors by over a third in most businesses. So if you think about how much money you're owed now, if you're owed £100,000 now, you know, if you implemented this sort of process, you might be expected to win back about 33 grand of that. 33 grand of that, which is not insignificant in terms of business funding. So there are a few top tips. Again, it's all about process and getting the team involved, you know, as part of this. And we're big advocates for using technology to help where possible in this process. So that's probably a good sort of segue to you, Richard, to get back into the Okappy side of things.
Right. Well, yeah, thanks a lot for that, Paul. I think that's really useful. I think the thing that stands out for me is there's a lot of kind of really simple, cost-effective things that you can do to have a big impact on your cash flow. So yeah, some good tips there. As I said, any questions, stick them in the chat, and for Paul or for me when I talk about the Okappy side, and we'll get back to them at the end. So in terms of systems there, in terms of Okappy in particular, I'm going to take you through a few different things around how you can raise a job, how you can get paid through Okappy. One of the things we hear often when companies first on board is, I'm kind of alluding to kind of what Paul says, about putting in place a control so that you know your invoices have been raised at the earliest opportunity. And ultimately, that's as soon as you've done your job. Often you want to get your invoice out, get it in front of your customers. One way to control that is by either automatically archiving your jobs once the invoice has been raised. So from your job dashboard, you can immediately see any jobs that are complete. If they're still on the job dashboard, then obviously they've not had an invoice raised. The second way is to use the invoice paid column. To do that, job options from the job dashboard, you can use these two options: the change page layout that will add on the invoice column, or the turn auto archiving off that archives the jobs automatically. Obviously, they're still available on the system, but at least you know that if they've been archived, then an invoice will most likely have been raised. Obviously, it's up to you which process you use. A lot of our customers go for the auto archive option because it keeps the dashboard cleaner and helps you basically see the wood from the trees. So once that's in place, how do you raise an invoice from Okappy? There's basically 3 different ways you can raise an invoice. You can raise it from a job, you can raise an invoice from a quote, or you can raise a miscellaneous invoice. One thing also to note, given that Okappy is a network, is that you can also receive invoices from your own subcontractors. In the same way that you send an invoice to your customer, your subcontractors can send an invoice to you. And that's also where you see our invoices as a supplier. So from the invoices screen, you've got invoices raised, the ones that you've raised, obviously, and invoices received, those from your subcontractors and suppliers. So how to raise an invoice from a job? So to raise an invoice from a job, basically select the job from the job dashboard, click the 3 dots next to the relevant job ID, and then click Raise Invoice. You can also, from within the job details screen, you can raise an invoice by clicking the Raise Invoice icon next to the Update Job icon. Sorry. Once you click that, the Raise Invoice window will show. Select your items, so your products and services. So if you're using Xero or QuickBooks, that will pull in automatically from those systems. If you're using older software such as Sage, ClearBooks, FreshBooks, you can create your products and items from the invoice options. We do have a lot of help and support, and I'll show you some links at the end if there's particular questions, or as I say, send the questions through in the chat. So select your items from the invoice window. That will pull in the description, and their price. So add in your quantity. If you do have information from the job, that will be in the description field. If you have changed your product or service after, it will get overwritten, but you can undo that from the undo icon. Once you've got all your information set, then you can raise your invoice as draft or submitted. And I'll come back to that in a sec, what's the difference. You can also raise invoices from a quote. So again, very similar type process. From the invoicing screen this time, select your quote, click the 3 dots next to the relevant quote ID, and then click Raise Invoice. The same window opens, select your items, your product and service, edit the description, add the quantity, and then raise the invoice again as draft or submit it as a live invoice. You can also raise, the final way is raising a miscellaneous invoice. So again, from the invoicing screen, in the same way that you create a job in the job screen, click the new invoice button at the top of the screen. The difference between raising an invoice from the invoicing screen or raising it from a job, if you raise it from a job, the job is linked to the invoice. So you can go from the job to the invoice and back again very easily. Obviously, if you raise a miscellaneous invoice, it's standalone. You can put whatever you need in that invoice. So again, click the new invoice button at the top of the screen, select sales invoice to raise an invoice, or quote if you want to raise a quote. Select your customer, select your items, or your products and services, edit your description, and then raise as draft or submit. So I've talked around how to raise an invoice. I mentioned about kind of raising it as a live invoice, or submitting it. What's the difference? Again, I suppose going to Paul's point, getting the invoice out to your customers as quickly as possible. With Okappy, because it's a network, if your customers are connected and logged in, then as soon as you submit that invoice, they can see that. So it means no more invoices lost in the post. No, we haven't seen it. And if you click the View the change log, you can actually see when your customers have viewed that invoice. So very useful, particularly if the invoice is running late, gives you more credibility when you're chasing your customer. Once the invoice has been raised, then depending on your settings, they can actually pay the invoice through Okappy. And I'll talk more about that in a sec as well. But first, Paul mentioned about keeping on top of your invoices, checking where they are in comparison to the due dates. With Okappy, there's 3 different ways that you can keep on top of your invoices and your invoice status. One thing to note is from the invoicing screen, you can see straight away at a granular level for each invoice, whether it's being paid or not. And in terms of how the invoice gets updated as paid, well, there's 3 different ways that can happen. One, you can mark the invoice as paid. So from the 3 dots, then click marked as paid. If you are using Xero and it's connected to Okappy, if you mark your invoice as paid in Xero, then that will flow through to Okappy automatically. The final way is if you have the pay now button on your invoice, and if they pay through Okappy, then that gets updated as paid automatically. So as I said, I'll talk more about the kind of the payment option in a sec, but yeah, that's kind of a useful feature in terms of knowing when the invoice has been paid and particularly kind of comparing it to the due date. You can also see when you're raising an invoice, you can see the total amount or the total balance outstanding. So that's all the invoices that you've raised, less all the invoices that have been paid. Obviously, if that becomes a big number, then it kind of gives you information. Do you want to raise more jobs, or do you want to kind of ensure the invoices have been paid before doing more work for a particular customer? And you've also got the report section. So these various reports, two in particular, the outstanding invoices report. So you can quickly see which invoices are outstanding and which ones are outstanding per customer. And the invoices paid report to see which invoices have been paid and when. So again, Paul mentioned about making it easy for your customers to pay you. You've got a lot of control over the invoice template, and you can update that from settings and then invoice template settings. So as Paul said, make sure you've got the right information on there, bank details, IBAN numbers, whatever it is that your customer needs. You also have the option to actually take payments through Okappy. And to do that, you simply enable the payment button on your invoices. When a customer clicks the button, they'll be taken through to our payment gateway, where they can make a secure payment to cover your invoice, and it will get updated automatically as paid. So you can determine which customers that button shows for. You can show it for all your customers, or you can turn it off altogether, depending on your specific requirements. To change the settings for a customer, if you go to the connections screen, so the connections icon on the top right, select customers, find the relevant customer, and the 3 dots menu, and you've got payment settings. And from there, you've got the checkbox, which determines whether the payment button shows or not on all your invoices. There is a transaction charge for processing it through our system. You can either add that on to the invoice, in which case it's your customer paying that charge, or you can set that as 0, in which case it will be taken off the invoice, so you're paying the charge. Or you can set it at a value between 0 and 5, in which case it will get split between you and your customer. So that was basically kind of what I wanted to cover in terms of Okappy. Just a quick recap. Paul gave you a number of tips around getting paid quicker. So setting your invoice up correctly, setting your process up correctly, sending the invoice as soon as possible, making it easy for them to pay, and then being on top of the due date of the invoice and knowing when to chase, and also kind of saying thank you when that invoice has been paid. I talked about raising your invoices, so from a job, from a quote, or a miscellaneous invoice. I showed kind of 3 ways in which you can see whether the invoices have been paid, either at a granular invoice level or at an aggregated customer level. And then finally, I took you through payment, how you can take payment through Okappy. As I mentioned, there's quite a bit of help and support on our website, so okappy.com support. There's various articles there about raising an invoice, taking payments, updating your invoice templates, Again, as I said, if you do want a copy of the slides, let us know and we can send them through to you. But otherwise, yeah, thanks for our webinar. Yeah, I hope you found it useful. I think we have got a few questions, so we'll take them now. Just a reminder, our next topic is going to be around the network, how to build your business on the network, which will be on the 23rd of June. So check out our event page for that. So just looking at these questions, so I think this one actually is relevant to you, Paul. Someone's got a question here. How often should you chase your overdue invoices?
Well, again, it's probably chasing the overdue invoices as part of an overall process. I would advocate that you do that process at least weekly. So you make sure that you're chasing at least weekly those overdue invoices. So you know, diarise a time every week that you're going to be chasing those overdue invoices, and make sure that you hit each one at least once a week. Depends on the size of the operation, but generally once a week is a good idea to processize it, diarise it, and get those who need to be involved. If you've got a sales team and that's wider, so you've got multiple salespeople, maybe they're involved in the process as well. Try and coordinate with all the relevant kind of stakeholders or relationship managers to chase as well.
Cool, brilliant. Another question I've got: how do you determine what information gets pulled in from the job? So I'll take that as one. So that's to do with Okappy. Yeah, basically when you raise an invoice from a job, it will automatically pull in key information from the job, and you have control over what information it pulls in, whether that's the reference, like a PO number, the site address, the completed date, details of the work done. And it's all driven by the job template. So what you've got set up in a job template, you've got various options, and in there's options about which fields pull in automatically. Obviously, when that information has been pulled into your invoice, you can still edit it. So if your engineer's language is not the best, or you need to add more details on, you still got control. But yeah, that's kind of useful, pulling the information in automatically. Again, it kind of saves you having to kind of look between different areas, different pieces of information between the job and the invoice. Yeah, question, just asking me to go back about how to check that the invoice has been paid. Let me see if I go back to that screen. So yeah, there's three kind of ways really that I kind of alluded to. There's the Invoice Dashboard, where you've got the paid icon, and you can search and you can order the Invoice Dashboard, so you can see all the invoices which have been paid, group them all together, all the ones that haven't been paid. You've also got the various reports. So invoices paid report and the outstanding invoice report are the key ones. Again, as I said, there's lots of help and support. There's information about all the different reports. But yeah, if you kind of check the reports screen and check what's in there, there's a lot of kind of useful information. Another question: when I raise invoices from a job, can I request at the same time the invoice be paid by a certain date and notified if it hasn't? Yeah, so when you raise your invoice, you set the tax date of the invoice, so the due date. You can see that on the outstanding invoices if it hasn't been paid, so if it's gone past the due date. That's obviously kind of the date that you're requesting the invoice to be paid. Actually, one other thing, when an invoice is paid, if it's paid through Okappy, you can also generate an email automatically to notify you that that invoice has been paid as well. I think that question was, can you be notified if it hasn't been paid? Well, there's not like an email notice, but you can kind of easily see whether they're outstanding. You can see from the Invoice Dashboard whether they've been paid or not. Cool. Okay, I think that's all the questions. Just let me have a quick check through. Yeah, I think that's all the questions we've got. We've gone through. I mean, if you do think of any more after the webinar, please feel free to send them through to myself. Just let me pull up our contact details are there. You can find from our website, and Paul's website, Twitter handle, LinkedIn is there as well. Yeah, connect with us on Twitter, connect with us on LinkedIn. But yeah, feel free to send any questions through if we've not covered them, and we'll get back to you. Likewise, if you want to copy the slides, if you want to copy the video, let us know. And we'll be sending out a quick survey as well after this event. So again, interested to hear how you found it, the timing, what we've covered, and if there's anything kind of you'd like us to cover in the future. Cool. So I mean, I think we have slightly overrun, but yeah, I mean, I found it useful as well. It was interesting hearing some of Paul's thoughts and kind of top tips. So yeah, unless there's any other questions, I'm gonna close the meeting and look forward to seeing you at the next one.